Okay, I think we're just about ready to start.
Yeah.
2 screens up,
No moose.
no moose, and everyone in their seat. So thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to be talking to you about best practices for Runbook authoring in Orchestrator. My name is Pete Zerger. I am an MVP in the cloud and data center management space, a consultant for a group called Infront Consulting Group, and a blogger over at SystemCenterCentral.com.
My name is Anders Bengtram. I'm a senior PFE at Microsoft. I also have a blog at contoso.se.
Great. So we are here today to share with you some of our experiences gained in the field over the last couple of years. Anders and I, since the acquisition of Appalis, have spent a lot of time with customers in the enterprise, focusing on automation scenarios of all kinds. So I like to think that we're not going to teach you about Runbook authoring. We're going to teach you how to do your Runbook authoring better. A little project Anders and I worked on together, the System Center 2012 Orchestrator Unleashed book due out this summer. So keep an eye out for that in the May-June timeframe. Hope you'll find that useful. So let's look at our agenda today. We're really going to start with the design and planning process. So we're going to talk about everything we do for Orchestrator before we use Orchestrator, before we open that Runbook designer and begin to develop our Runbooks. We'll certainly talk through that development process, lots of tips and tricks as we're building our workflow, and then we're going to transition into automation. So we're going to talk about what we do with that Runbook once we believe we are ready for prime time. We're ready to take that to our production environment. So we have a lot to share with you today. We'd appreciate if we could hold the questions till the end of the session. We'll do our best to do good on time. I know when we put Anders on stage, it's difficult to make him stop talking, but we'll try our best. We also have a speaker Q&A every evening, so you're free to join us out by the server aquarium for 90 minutes from 6 to 7:30 this evening. So happy to talk to you about just about anything when we show up for the speaker Q&A. So let's begin with the planning process. The first question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want to automate? What do I want to automate first, more appropriately, right? And I think this is pretty easy. You get the folks together and we just start sharing our problems. What processes do we have out there that are time-consuming? Where are our service levels suffering? Where are we seeing problems that are recurring over and over again, where automation might help us to improve service levels? Frankly, what's costing our organization money? What's expensive in our organization in terms of processes and failures? And I think always important, which failures are visible? So we're all here to add value from a C-level perspective, right? We all want the CIO to smile and be proud of us. So thinking about what's customer-facing is always very, very important, I think. So we make this list, and I make these lists too, and I always think I know which candidates are going to be the best candidates for Runbook automation. And I find that maybe 2 times out of 10 I'm actually right. So that is to say, I think I know, except I don't usually. So we have to ask ourselves some questions before Runbook authoring actually begins. So at this point, I'm in a conference room with my colleagues. I maybe have Excel up on the projector with a list of the processes I think I might like to automate. The first question I'm going to ask myself is Orchestrator the right tool for the task? So the question is never, can I do this with Orchestrator? It's,
We can do anything with Orchestrator.
it's really should I do this with Orchestrator? And we do many things that we shouldn't do with Orchestrator sometimes, so it's always good to sort of make sure we're using Orchestrator for where it's best, right? I could use Orchestrator to monitor a website, to monitor a service, but that's what my monitoring platform's, right? So I want to let Operations Manager, Configuration Manager, VMM, etc., let those components do their job and use Orchestrator to supplement, not to supplant those technologies. Then we need to think about technical feasibility. If you are a group of IT pros, developing a Runbook that requires C# development skills is probably not going to be a fantastic idea, right? If we have an application or service that is a black box. If we don't understand the APIs or how to get at the data, that's going to present a technical feasibility problem. We need to think about development cost and effort. So the ratio of how much time we're going to gain back versus how much time it's going to take to develop that automation. And we really need to think about that with Murphy's Law in mind. I build most of my runbooks in my office, and Murphy lives in my guest room. So I think it never happens as fast as I like or quite in quite the way I like. Does it work for you the first time? Are you maybe just smarter than me?
A bit, but it still doesn't work for me the first time.
Okay, yes, so he is smarter than me, to be clear, but it doesn't work for him the first time either. So really understand that it's going to be an iterative process. You're going to find that maybe activity X doesn't do quite what you want, and you're going to go another route. Lots of ways to solve any given scenario in Orchestrator for sure. Time to recoup investment, so think ROI. So certainly there's a technical aspect to runbook authoring. There is a financial aspect, and we're going to put that in very black and white terms, because you will do a lot with Orchestrator. We want to make sure that that path you go down is the right one. Think about network connectivity from a technical perspective. If I'm trying to automate something in a perimeter network, Orchestrator is an agentless technology, right? So if I need to copy files out to a file share, if I'm going to connect to SSH, I need some ports open on my firewall. So be very cognizant for what those requirements are. And what about closing the loop with ITSM, with our ITIL processes, right? So many things we're going to do with Orchestrator involve remediation, which means there must be an incident somewhere in a service desk, right? Many things will involve provisioning, which means there should be a change request somewhere. So closing that loop on the first pass is going to be the right thing to do. At the end of the day, if you build a runbook that causes more questions than answers, generates phone calls, then we're doing something wrong, right? We want to close that communication loop.
And a bad process. If you have a bad process today, it will not get any better if you put it into Orchestrator. It will just...
Yeah, so a process that sucks today is going to suck faster in Orchestrator. There's certainly an accelerant there. So bear that in mind. So we make that list, and we begin to go through and we apply some criteria. We think about frequency of use. So does this process recur once a month, once a quarter, 5 times a day? What's our automation effort going to be? Is it going to take me 8 hours, a week, a month? Can I download this on Anders' blog? The answer is frequently yes. So search engines are your friends. And think about variants, exceptions, right? So we need to map out that process and understand how the process occurs step by step by step, and if those steps are the same every time. So if we have variants in there, if step 3, may be option A, B, or C, variance doesn't kill, the possibility of automation. It adds some complexity, and we need to understand how we can bridge that gap in variance, where we can go look up the answer as we're automating that process. So if you have a process that's wildly unpredictable, it may not be a fantastic candidate, but we apply these criteria: high frequency, low complexity, low effort, and we come to a list of our best candidates for runbook automation. In other words, this is where we start. We start simple. Yeah? Fair? Yeah. So let's look at a couple of scenarios here just to apply these criteria in a real way. So we have manual task X. Doesn't matter what it is. User onboarding, restarting a service, rebooting a server, whatever. It happens once a month. It takes us 20 minutes to perform this task. And we figure it's going to take us more or less about a week to build this runbook. So if we look at the ROI, we see that a 20-minute task times once a month is going to be about 4 hours a year. And if I take 40 hours to develop this, I'm going to gain my return on investment in approximately 10 years, which makes me approximately a horrible investor, an embarrassing investor, right? So, scenario number 2, incident remediation. So here's a perfectly normal, very common scenario we see with Operations Manager on the monitoring side of the house. We have a service that stopped, and we would like to automate the recovery. Let's say it only happens once a day amongst all our servers. I think that's a low number in a lot of environments. So the first line support receives the phone call. They take 5 minutes to escalate. tier 2 remote, uses remote desktop, restarts the services. By that time, we've killed 15, 20 minutes. If it takes us a week to build that Runbook, now I think you actually can download that one off Anders' blog or build it in, yourself in about an hour. But let's pretend like it takes a week. 20 minutes a day, once a day, that's 121 hours a year. In your environment, it's probably, in most environments, I would think it's actually many more services stopping in a day and many more hours. If it takes a week to develop, we're going to gain our investment back in only 4 months. So that is going to be a great candidate.
Yeah, and one thing to add that we haven't included in that calculation, that's human errors. That we only calculate that it will take us 5 plus 15 minutes to fix this error, but what if every 10 times it occurs, we do something wrong, instead of restarting the service, we shut down the server, like a little bit lost in the UI, so you shut down the server instead of restarting the service.
Fantastic point, as always. Human error is one of those things we don't account for, and so we're really taking any task that we can perform manually and simply making it more reliable, reducing our own risk, right? And being sort of lazy myself, I'm always happy to not be the guy pushing the buttons. So Anders and I both get this one a lot. Let's just take a customer scenario. We walk in the door and the customer has downloaded Orchestrator. They've heard the pitch at how easy Orchestrator is to use, and it is very easy. I think you can learn Orchestrator.
Maybe they have attended an event.
Oh yeah.
So a couple of guys demo it on stage.
Yeah.
Seems really nice.
Yeah. So you feel like you're ready to go, right? We walk in the door and we get this scenario that's something akin to inventing Skynet, and we're going to take process A and connect it to system B. Restart service X, connect to web service Y, and while we're waiting, we'll go get Anders a Starbucks. And we don't think it's going to take more than 14 to 18 months to build. You guys can handle it for us, we're sure. And we're just guessing because we've never used Orchestrator before. We did see that session at MMS.
And then we were checking your list, and John Connor is not working at that company.
So we will tackle this. Anders will do this one, and I'll watch quietly from the corner. So this is a scenario that's not going to make sense, right? We want to start simply. You have to walk before you can run, and at the end of the day, if you build an automation scenario that is not easier and more broadly supportable by your IT pros, if it's not easy for them to look at the screen and understand what that Runbook is doing, if it's not paying you back in a reasonable amount of time, if it's not closing the loop with your ITIL process, with incident change and problem management, then we failed in our mission to fully capitalize on Runbook automation.
Yeah, so the message there is really to start small, to get to know the platform, to ramp up on Orchestrator, start to learn how it actually is working, what you can do, and then maybe in the future go to these really huge scenarios, but start small, and often, as Pete showed before, often it's the really small ones where you will save a lot of time and a lot of money. So don't target the really big ones, start with the small ones.
Straight from the mouth of the master. So let's look at the scenario we're going to share with you today. So we're going to focus on a sample scenario as we walk through the development process now. So the developers at Contoso need to release code frequently, right? They take it from dev to production. We have a normal development and promotion process. It's time consuming for the devs. The IT support side has to put effort into it, so we've decided we're going to automate this process with Orchestrator. So let's get started.
So finally in Runbook Designer.
You almost couldn't wait, could you?
Couldn't wait.
It's
all your PowerPoints.
Enjoy.
So what we will start with in this scenario, we will automate this with Orchestrator to create a web service in Windows Azure. And we will start by just drag and drop a couple of activities, and it will most likely work. So in this case, we create start over here. We format a date timestamp. We create a cloud service. We create a storage container in Azure. We upload our files to Azure, and then we deploy. So it's done. This Runbook will most likely work. We worked this
Yeah,
morning.
yeah. So this is what you call this drag drop done, right?
Drag drop down, yeah, version number 1. And this is what we see that many people do. They just drag drop here. It works, but as you will see during this session, this is not really working, even if it would return green if we click run right now.
So fair to say it would work mostly, yeah, usually.
Most likely.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like in a normal scenario where everything else is working, that Runbook could be working.
So is this how you do it in real life, though? Is that how you develop a runbook? Does it start with just the bare necessities, just make sure I can get it done?
Often it starts with like drag and dropping a couple of activities, getting the function or the scenario to work, and then after that adding on like performance optimization, adding on fault tolerance, error handling, and everything else. And that's what we will also do during this session.
Right, so step 1, get it done. So first it's functional, and then it's pretty, right? So now we go.
And as Pete said earlier, with Murphy's Law in mind, this is something around here you will understand, or you will understand whatever you missed during the planning phase, because it doesn't really matter how much time you plan your runbooks, you will most likely end up with something here like, yeah, right, that activity didn't really work that way. Or we need to open another firewall, we need to do something else, we have to have a server on the secured network or something like that.
So what you're going to find over time, you want to pad your authoring time, right? Add 25, 50% in there for a little margin of error. But over time, you're going to build up this library of runbooks that will do things like find a user's account in Active Directory, send an email, etc. You'll build this library of automation that makes what might take you a week today, something that you can solve in half a day a year from now.
So if you're coming from the dev side, you will most likely recognize that, building your library of runbooks that you then just invoke from different other runbooks. But from people at the pro side might think it's funny just to add a lot of activities in there and get a activity swamp in the runbook.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
So some general best practice rules. First one is to rename your activities. When you just drag and drop your activities, they will all have the default names. And the idea around Runbook compared with a Moonshine script is that when you look at the Runbook, you should actually understand what it's doing. And renaming your activity is a good start. So rename them with a small description what they are actually doing. And then also change the link colors. So when you connect links in between activities, the link color is always black by default. But it's a good idea to change it, maybe to change it to green for success, or red for or error handling, or maybe yellow for could be.
So you're building a visual path
Exactly.
that shows me where the automation flows when it works and where it flows when it doesn't.
Exactly. Right? So when I see the runbook the first time, I want to see that the thick green line, this is the path I want the runbook to execute. And if something happens, it should go with the red line, link down to this here and generate alert in Operation Manager or something. But then we also have yellow, and yellow would be where we want the runbook to choose this path or this path depending on the result from the previous activity. So we are not saying that yellow is wrong or more correct than another way. It's just like depending on this result, the runbook should go up here or go this way. So we're using yellow when we have a criteria on the link to show that there is a criteria on this link.
And yes, it's not yellow. I saw a confused look over there. It's orange because we thought you might not be able to see yellow on the screen. So color as you like.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one here is fold on runbook structure and naming convention. So when you start building your runbooks, you will quite soon realize that you will have a lot of runbooks, like a lot. We have a couple of customers that have like 1,000 runbooks. So naming convention is very, very important there, and also a good folder structure. When you start integrate with Service Manager, as we will do a little bit later in this session, you will see that all the runbook shows up in a flat list on the Service Manager side. So if you don't have a good naming convention, you will most likely never find your runbook in Service Manager. Also, when you're moving between environments, as Pete will come back to later this session also, Yeah.
Yeah.
You always get this small dialog box like, do you want to override the current runbook or do you want to create a copy of it and so on? If you don't have a good naming convention there, there's always a big risk that you are overwriting the wrong runbook in your production environment. And then the production environment could end up in a little bit of a bad mood.
An angry runbook.
An angry runbook.
I'm not sure exactly what an angry runbook is, but I'm guessing it's not good. So what about using numbers in my naming conventions?
Yeah, so I like using numbers. We could actually show it here.
Yeah.
It's easier.
So let's have a look at numbering in the naming convention.
Yeah, so go down here. We see that we have a folder structure here, starting with 1 up here. And then we have, for example, this folder number 4, and subfolders is named 4.1, and subfolders under the subfolder is 4.1.1. And if we look at our runbook here, we can see that the runbook is also named, it's following the same structure, so we can easily see wherever this runbook is in the folder structure. So if our runbook generates an alert in Operation Manager or in our log, we can easily see exactly which runbook is that.
That's great. And what I like to do when I have a multi-runbook workflow, I like to name my runbooks with sequential numbers. So I know, runbook 1 calls runbook 2, and maybe 2ABC, 3, 4, 5, etc. So visually and logically, I have a flow of how these runbooks call one another. So when I've slept a couple of times and this runbook is not fresh in my mind, I can come back and pretty quickly catch the plot again and work with that scenario.
Next one here is variables and hard-coded values. Of course, you should try to avoid having hard-coded values within your runbooks. Let's say that you have 10 runbooks that all need to know the file server, for example.
Yeah, sure. File server, email, any sort of frequently used value. Variables are what Microsoft tells us to use, right?
Yeah, exactly. So instead of then putting in the file server name in each activity in each runbook, you just have a variable and you just use it, or just invoke it or pick it up whenever runbook needs. So that's nice because it's really easy to update because you only change your variable and then all the runbooks are using the new setting. The challenge around this is that when you're moving between different environments, you get a small dialog box saying, do you want to override this variable, or do you want to create a new one with the new value, or do you want to create a new one with the old value, or do you want to create like one with a random value? It's very tricky because those dialog boxes, if you click wrong there somewhere, you will update your variables in your production environment, and you don't really know what runbook that was just affected or what you just did. So instead of using variables, maybe you can use and store your settings in like a SQL database that you just invoke or query from your different runbooks. Or maybe you can store it in Service Manager and just go and pick it up from Service Manager from your runbook.
So that's a great point. So I think you're saying don't use variables at all, but there's some alternatives that can maybe. Who knows about that dialog box Anders speaks of when you import a runbook and you get the warning? Yeah, it's sort of disconcerting sometimes, isn't it? So a reference table then, right? So we could just use the query database activity to go pull those values from a database and not have to worry about variables at all. So we just work right around that that runbook global setting warning that we see on import.
Exactly.
Great idea.
Last one here is from left to right. So back again to the colors and link and renaming activities. When you see the runbook, you want to understand what it's doing. So if you have some kind of clue about Active Directory and you are looking at the Active Directory runbook, you should understand what it's doing. Maybe not all the details, but you should understand in the big picture by just looking at the runbook. And one thing to keep in mind there is to have your runbook moving from left to right. It shouldn't be moving from left to middle to top to right and then back again to left because you don't have a big screen enough, and then down like a snake like this and then to the right. It should just be one
who has the
line.
snake runbook?
They don't really say it out loud here. Everyone has a snake runbook.
Continue, please.
Yeah. So the next one here. The next slide will show you a really bad example of this. So Pete, if you explain that one, I will just go and get Starbucks.
So if I was drinking the moonshine he mentioned earlier, I might be able to explain that one. But I've actually seen this one in real life. I saw a deployment scenario, 150 or more activities, 15 branches of logic, actually pulling software from file shares rather than calling SCCM. And I remember asking the orchestrator, why didn't you use Configuration Manager? Because he did, after all, sit in the cube right next to the Config Manager admin. And he said, well, you know, we really don't get along. So
yeah, so the whole idea around building it in Orchestrator should be it should be easy to update also. So you all have these special scripts that someone wrote, maybe they have even left the company now, you don't dare to update it, you don't really know what kind of language it's written in and so on. The whole idea with Orchestrator is to keep it very simple in here, so almost everyone could go in here and update as long as they understand the technology that we are integrating with.
So the orchestrator is not the one that just builds cool runbooks, but the one that develops naming conventions and runbook standards that make it very easy for the entire IT support organization to get involved and automate and help them support that orchestration effort.
So let's move over to our demo environment again and see how we can apply these general rules to our demo scenario. Let's move down here. So in this scenario here, or in this version, we have added link colors. And as you can see now, it's very easy to understand that it's moving from left to right as long as it's working. If we go to the next version, we have also renamed the activities, and here we have also added a little bit of arrow handling. So if anything here doesn't really work, we will go this way and we'll generate an alert in Operation Manager.
Great, so we have a success path with green and then a failure path with the red.
Exactly, yeah. We might want to add a couple of more generate alerts that can be a little bit more dynamic, but it shows the idea. Then if we go in the next version here, and before we look at this version, I want to show you another thing that I have prepared down here. Have you seen this, Pete?
I have not seen this.
So in this runbook, this is a really simple runbook. It just runs a command, and if we open this run program, we see it copy a file from one folder to another folder. Now if we run it, this is super exciting, very exciting.
Riveting.
Yeah.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, this
virtually.
is really a new generation of runbooks.
It's a new paradigm in automation. So what's the result here? What's the payoff?
Yeah, so now we can see that it returns green here, but if we open it, you see, it's green, run program, success. But if we open it, and we go down to pure output, you can see that it didn't find the file that we were going to copy. So the message here is that some of our activities will return green even if they haven't done what you expect them to do.
So it ran the command successfully, but didn't at all have the desired result. So validation is critical, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it managed to open a command prompt at the target machine, and it's happy for that.
Amen. So check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's what automation is all about, right? With scripts, with a PowerShell script, I can make a PowerShell script do anything I want. Usually, it's the air checking where I kind of fall off. You know, we get busy, or maybe we're just not fantastic with writing, you know, all manner of air checking. And Orchestrator makes that very easy for us to execute and then validate. So always be thinking about checking conditions before you execute and conditions after you execute.
Yeah, exactly. So in this version, we have added one get internet application status. So once we have done all this, we have uploaded our web service to Azure. We have created the cloud service, and we have deployed it in Azure. We also verify that we can actually connect to it from our network. So we not only have the arrow handling here, we are also double checking it with the get internet application status activity. One thing to add around the naming convention, don't know how you normally do this bit, but if you have a runbook that starts with a monitor activity, I like to put something in the name of the runbook, something like maybe not monitor, but some little checkbox, some extra in the naming convention, just to indicate that this runbook starts with a monitor activity, and it should always be running because it starts off with a monitor activity. And if you have that in the name of the runbook, it's quite simple to monitor that with, for example, Operation Manager, to run a SQL query and check, are all runbooks named monitor something running right now? And it's also quite nice for engineers that are working in the runbook designer. If they find a runbook that's not really running, they don't have to think too much about, should this one be on? Should I turn it off? Should I have it on?
So he makes the perfect point here, and when we get a little bit further into the demo here, you'll actually see some queries and runbooks Anders has written out on the internet that will help you answer that very question. The hamster's in the wheel, but are they all running, right?
Yeah. Great point, Pete. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad.
So it starts looking quite nice now. We have arrow handling. We even double check that we have managed to deploy our web service to Azure. That's a good thing if the internet connection is not really working with us. But what if the runbook is interrupted in between some of the activities? You switch back here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fault tolerance. First, we need to have fault tolerance on the Orchestrator infrastructure, meaning that we have to cluster the SQL database. We need to have multiple runbook servers, and so on. But even if we have that, when Orchestrator fails over, like if a runbook server goes down, goes offline for some reason, all the running runbooks will fail over to the secondary runbook server. That's really nice. The challenge is that they will restart at the first activity. And you need to handle this on a runbook level, so you need to design your runbooks to handle this. And you also need to design your runbooks to handle all different results. So when you connect two activities together, by default, you only handle the success result. But instead, you should also add a path, like we are doing here in arrow handling. You should always add a path like, what if this activity is not working? Then go down this path and do like this. And yeah, then we have monitoring activities again. So monitoring activities are monitoring a data source, and then when something happens in there, they kick off the rest of the runbook. So let's say that we are monitoring a folder for new files. As soon as we click run, or about a couple of minutes after we click run or start the runbook, we will start monitoring that folder for new files. Then if we stop the runbook and a new file is written to the folder and we start our runbook again, the runbook will not pick up that file because that file was already in the folder when we started the runbook, and the runbook is only monitoring for new files when it's running.
So that's a perfect point. I'm glad he looked at me so I can talk about this. So monitor file has on the triggers tab, it has a trigger for new, it has a trigger for update. It doesn't have a trigger for process all the stuff that was sitting there when you weren't running. So an ad hoc runbook that will go out and clean up what was happening during the lull in our monitoring runbook is very, very important. Especially if we're doing something that's production critical, like order processing, right? Yeah. Nobody wants their order left behind.
So you might want to build something like, let's say you're monitoring this folder for new files, and you need to shut down your Orchestrator environment. Then you might want to have a runbook that when you start everything up again, you start running one runbook that would go into the folder, get all files in that folder, process them, and then invoke the other runbook that starts with the monitoring activity. So you have, like, as Pete said, like a cleanup runbook first.
Yeah, so that's really important, actually. There should be a sign on every Orchestrator instance that says, your mother does not work here, clean up after yourself, right? So we're making
Great
redundancy
point.
not just in our Orchestrator infrastructure, we're building redundancy within our runbook. So when we encounter unexpected conditions, like something as simple as we had to do some maintenance and somebody stopped a runbook, when we start that sequence up again, we're going to go clean up after ourselves and pick up what we might have missed while we weren't watching.
So I've created a small demo around this also. So in this example, we have a runbook here that will generate an event, just saying which runbook server it's running on, then wait a half minute, generate a new event with the current runbook server, and then wait a half minute, and then new event again. I think you get it. So if we start it, we will see it start generating events down here very soon.
Yeah, so in the summary here, you're going to see the Runbook server name as this pops up.
Yeah, so exactly. So over here, we see that we have the primary Runbook server. It's named O2, and it generates event number 1, and now it's waiting. What do you think about link delays, Pete?
Well, so you know, by default, when you connect activity A to activity B, the default is that if activity A executes successfully, activity B is triggered immediately. And there are going to be occasions where we need to pause and catch our breath and let whatever activity A is doing set and finish. So link delays, we can delay that trigger within the link, or we could maybe look at that another way. Do you just delay on the link, or how do you do it?
I don't delay on the link. I don't think that's best practice, and I will show you why. Because right now, our runbook is between the event 1 and event 2. And if we go down here on log, we can see it's on, all right, now it's on event number 2. But we can't see that it's on the link waiting for something. So if this runbook is hanging, or we need to investigate why it's taking so long time, and we look at it, it seems like it just hanged on the previous activity when it's actually on the link. So I like to use either I build my own wait activity, or I use like a .NET script or something and put the wait in there, like PowerShell wait a little bit, and then I just rename the activity to wait 1 minute or something. So then instead on the log tab we will see that right now it's on the wait activity.
So you're going to use PowerShell more often than not to solve this pause problem then?
Well, you could, if you have a lot of pause in your daily work,
yeah,
you could build your own activity, of course, based on PowerShell or whatever you like.
Yeah, so we're not abandoning PowerShell. We're using it a little more strategically now. We're using smaller bits and pieces to supplement what we're doing with the native activities and integration packs with Orchestrator.
And if you don't want to write that on your own, you could actually download it from my blog.
There we go.
So back to the demo again. As you could see while Pete was talking, I stopped the Runbook service on my primary Runbook server. That means that was the Runbook server where the Runbook was running. Now it failed over to the secondary Runbook server, and we can see that it's running again. But as you can see, we are now on event number 1 again. So if we go over to events here, you can see that it starts really nice here. Event 1 and 2 on the primary Runbook server. Then it failed over. It took like a minute. And now it's back at activity number 1 again.
Excellent. So it fails over, it fails back. It's that waterfall model with Orchestrator. We stand up a second Runbook server, and when Runbook server number 1 fails, it automatically heads to number 2. So HA on the front end, dead simple.
Yeah. So if we go back to our demo scenario, and we want to add a little bit of fault tolerance there, you can see that we have added here. We have, let me zoom. We have added another red path here. So if this one fails, we go up here, we delete the cloud service, and we send an email. And if this step fails, we delete the 2 previous steps, the create container and the delete cloud service, and we send an email. So as you can see, this is what you were talking about, Pete, before, about cleaning up. So if this runbook fails at any steps, we clean up what it has already been doing in our environment.
Yeah, so Anders is more thorough about this than anybody I think I've ever seen. So he's actually planning for an interruption halfway through a provisioning process where we're going to go back and clean up what we managed to accomplish halfway to completion. So think about that in change management terms. When we log a change request, we have a deployment plan, we have a test plan, we have a rollout plan, and we have a rollback plan. This is your rollback plan right here.
Yeah. But as you can see now, we start getting a lot of activities in our runbook. I don't have a hard value of number of activities you should not go over in your runbook, but if you need to scroll in your runbook designer it's time to divide your runbook into smaller pieces. And if you keep them small, it's much more simpler to update and work with them. And as Pete said before, you want to build your library of functions and then just invoke them instead of having too much activity within one runbook.
Yeah, and when you're in a metered environment like a public cloud, we're paying for what we use, right? So paying for what you use is fantastic until you don't clean up after your failed deployments, and we see our storage, just chunking up incrementally.
Yeah, so if we go back again and look at the next version, we have now divided our runbook into smaller pieces. We have our parent runbook invoking the other smaller pieces. If we look at like the cloud service here, we invoke it, we pass a couple of parameters down to this runbook from the parent runbook. We create the cloud service, we return the result back to the parent runbook that then continue invoking next runbook here. So, and if this one fails, we go down and invoke the cleanup runbook that will do all the cleaning in our environment. So we took the big runbook now, we have divided into smaller pieces. It's much easier to update, easier to understand, and it's really easy to reuse one of the runbooks now, because if we need to have a cloud service in another scenario, we can just invoke the same runbook. But there is some things you should keep in mind, that each time that you're using the invoke runbook activity, that's a new job written to the Orchestrator database, and it takes some time for the runbook servers to go and pick it up. So you might end up with a little bit of a queue there or a little bit of a delay. Let's say that you have activity that returns 100 answers, and you want to invoke the next runbook, one instance for each answer. And if you have configured that second runbook to only run one instance at a time, you will end up with a queue in your environment. So using the invoke runbook, there should be some kind of balance between performance and building library runbooks. What do you say?
Yeah, that's a perfect point. So if I have a data set of, say, 100 items that I need to process quickly, it might be more efficient for me to handle that data processing in a single runbook rather than calling a second, a child runbook 100 times, right? So we want to think about runbooks as being, small modular function-specific runbooks, and we treat our data set as a single data set within a single runbook. So we don't have, shall we say, job sprawl.
Great.
That's a new thing, job sprawl. So if you hear that again,
it came from you.
It came from Pete.
So the next thing we should add here is logging. Switch over again. Where's that? Here. So logging. So you need some kind of process-specific log when you're doing an Orchestrator, and of course a little bit extra if you're integrating with, for example, Service Manager or any other tools like Service Manager. Because if you have a scenario, let's say, let's pick one you don't hear very often, deploy a new virtual machine. Yeah?
That's the first time I've heard this.
Yeah, I know.
Continue.
Yeah, very interesting scenario. Yeah, let's say that you deploy the virtual machine, you need to get a piece of the SAN, you need to deploy it, you need to install it, you need to install the antivirus and the operation manager agent and so on. There's a lot of steps in there. And if you then integrate with Service Manager and someone order this in a service request, you want to keep track of it, at which step am I right now according to your process. So you need to have some kind of process-specific log that is more like log, overview log, not all the details.
So in other words, a process log is going to log the step-by-step of my process without regard to the runbooks I'm calling. It's just giving me a representation of how far, how many steps into the process I've achieved. Yeah?
Yeah. But then you need a technical log also, because if something goes wrong in your runbook, you want to go in and you want to investigate, why did my runbook choose this path and not that path, or why did it do like this, or why did it create the account in the computer container in AD or something like that. And as you know, as soon as the runbook is done, it will delete the data bus and everything that was in the data bus, so there is no way to actually see all the output and input that the runbook was using when it executed. So we need to build that on ourselves in our runbooks. And you shouldn't use a log file. All the SCCM guys, they oh no, I want to use my log files. So you shouldn't use a log file here, because if you, the common scenario is that you put the log file on the Runbook server, but if you then fail over to a secondary Runbook server, the log file will not fail over to the secondary Runbook server. Instead, that will be kept on the first one, and then you have like logging on 2 servers, and that's just a mess. Also, if one of the runbooks are writing to the log, there is always a risk that the log is locked by some other runbook, and the runbook you are looking at can't write to the log file. So then you won't even have everything in your log file, so don't use log files.
So you're really telling us to just stay away from text-based logs altogether to avoid those disconnects and locking problems.
Yeah, I never use text logs.
Fair enough.
You shouldn't use the send platform event, and I know a lot of people are doing that.
Who in here uses send platform event? Who are the guilty? Okay, thank you for being honest. Why not?
Because the send platform event, to see the send platform event, you have to be sitting in the Runbook Designer, and you shouldn't be sitting in the Runbook Designer during the whole day, like the daily work, because you should invoke your Runbook from something else, and then if you need to review what is done, you should look in the logs, because the send platform events, you can only see them in the Runbook Designer, and they will just fill your database with junk. Because if you have like all your runbooks logging to send platform events, most likely you can't even find the event that you are looking for, because you will have like a million of events in there. So just don't use it for that purpose. And you shouldn't enable activity-specific logging. It's a really nice thing that you can enable on all your runbooks, and it's sometimes good to do it, but you should never do it in production environment, because it will just fill your database with so much data that you don't need. Do you use it?
Well, so what if I need to solve a problem in production? Can I enable activity level logging there, or am I going to just avoid it altogether?
Nah, then it's okay.
WWAD, what would Anders do? Yeah, so activity level logging is great for verbose information when we're troubleshooting, right? It's fantastic, but it's going to, as Anders said, bloat the size of your database. It's one of those things that once we turn it on, it's possible or maybe even probable that we're going to forget to turn it off. And we make that same mistake, a dozen, 100, 500 times. It's going to add up, and it's going to mean many, many gigabytes of difference in our database over months of use.
Yeah. So instead of using log files or send platform events, instead use like a central SQL server or a SQL database where you put all your logging in there. Or maybe if you, depending on the amount of data, you could actually write it back to an object in Service Manager. I'm not saying that's really best practice in all scenarios, because we shouldn't fill the CMDB with a lot of log data, but some information that some runbooks return, we could actually write it back to our work item or CI item in Service Manager.
Well, and if I've integrated with my ITIL processes, I could be writing back to my incident or my change, yeah?
Yeah, and we will actually show a demo of that later. So Pete was talking about that we generate a lot of data with activity-specific logging. I can show you an Excel sheet I have here. So this is the Excel sheet that you can download from my blog when you're doing your planning. But as you can see here, let's say, no, we need to switch to my machine. Oh, thanks.
Better.
Yeah, thanks. So let's say here that we have one runbook with 10 activities. That's like a common scenario, 10 activities.
There.
Then each time we run this activity, it will add this amount of bytes. And if we run it 500 times, it will add 29 megabytes to the database. So 500 times 29 megabytes of data. And that's when we have the common published data logging on. If I now go and switch it, you see instead we add 2.5 megabytes to the database.
So much different.
Yeah, so instead of keeping this on and adding 29, we can keep it on default, non-logging, and we only add 2.5 megabytes to the database, and instead we build logging inside of our runbooks to log the data that we actually need.
Wow, so think about that, quantify that in your mind. 10 times the data per runbook, per execution, times the many hundreds of runbooks you're going to have a year from now.
Exactly. So this is only one runbook, yeah. So what if you have like 600 or 700 runbooks there? So we should look also, there is one, if you now you're sitting and thinking like, maybe I have it enabled on all my runbooks at home.
Yeah, so this is a great question. Let's say I've been making this mistake for the last 18 months. I'm not saying I have, but how would I go, answer that question? Which runbooks have this turned on?
Then you could run a quite small SQL query here to look at all the runbooks in the policy table here. That has the log specific data equals 1 or the log common data equals 1. And if you run it, you will get a list down here where you can see the runbooks and you can also see what kind of logging they have enabled. And you can also see if you have a policy timeout there. And here on the left side, you start to understand that the whole naming convention thing is quite important, like that one. Where is that runbook? I think I have like 700 or 800 runbooks in my VM, and finding a runbook without a good naming convention, that takes a long time.
Only 700, slacker. So where can we find this super secret query? Say it together with me now. Anders blog. So we'll make sure that he has some to-dos to put some URLs into a file that we can attach to the deck or append at the end.
Absolutely, I will do that. So if we go back to our demo scenario again, and we look at it, a small piece of it, I have now added this logging here that we invoke another runbook, and the only data we pass to that runbook is the runbook name, severity, and a small description. I've just added here started and then the input parameters. No.
Powerful point he makes here, exactly how I do it, exactly how you should do it. Anders, can you just show us the parameters of that invoke runbook activity again, your write log? He's passing in the severity, the description, and the name of the runbook. When we're building many modular function-specific runbooks, and I need to figure out exactly where the error occurred and which runbook made the call, it's going to be really important for me to understand which runbook called my error logging, right?
Yeah. So, and then we have the runbook over here that is actually just receiving all the data. If the severity is critical, we generate an alert in Operation Manager instant, else we just write it to the database, and then I can go into my SQL here, and I have a table here named log in a new database I call Orchestrator tool, where I then keep all my logging, and it's really simple here to see what kind of runbook, date, time, the severity, and a short description here. So it's a really nice log. It's easy also to clean it up now if I want to delete all log entries and so on. Yep.
So brilliant. Central logging that we can easily query with SQL, SQL Management Studio. We can write to that log with the query database activity. And so no worries about failing over across runbook servers, multiple runbooks. We're all in one place.
Yeah, so this slide here shows you a couple of different phases that you should always have in your runbook. The first one, action request, that's something that you should always think about how you're going to start your runbook, and the answer shouldn't be runbook designer. No, it should be something else, like service manager or some other tool. Then you should always collect all the input data you need in an early stage, because if you continue to run the runbook, it might fail later, and then you need to do a lot of cleanup because it couldn't really find all the data it needed. So collect all the data you need, validate the data, and store it somewhere temporary, because if you query the same data source twice from the same runbook, there is always a risk that you get different answers, and then your runbook will be in a little bit of a bad mood.
Or angry runbooks.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and then of course execute. If you integrate with Service Manager, you will get the 4 first phases for free. So even if you're not planning to use Service Manager for incident and change management and so on, you could use it just to get this nice portal in front of Orchestrator. And also, you can use like the forms in Service Manager to do all the data validation, and you will also record all the information in the work item in Service Manager. So it's a great integration. It will give you a lot of stuff for free that you will need for your Orchestrator runbooks.
So even if I'm not using Service Manager as my CMDB, as my service desk component, you're saying I could use this just as a rich repository, as a self-service portal, and I could use that data to supplement whatever service desk solution I'm using now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we've implemented Service Manager together with Orchestrator a number of times, not to use Service Manager for incident and change management, just to get the console so people can go into the portal and to get the portal, so people can go in there doing their request and then kick off runbooks. And we have all the auditing in Service Manager, like who approved this, who ordered this, who executed it, and so on and so on.
Yeah, really important points, and something we do in enterprises every day. We implement Service Manager, and we sell that for what it is. It's a complementary component to any existing service desk solution if you're not ready to make that leap yet.
Yeah. So if we switch over to the demo again, the final version here of our scenario, where is that? Here. So we have the golden version here. This version, it's actually doing exactly the same as the first version, where we only have 6 or 7 activities. But now we have divided into we have divided it into smaller runbooks, and each runbook also have their own fault tolerance and error handling, so they are totally independent of each other. As you can see, we don't have a parent runbook anymore, as we had in the previous version. Instead, we have just independent runbooks. And then in Service Manager, we have created a custom class, a custom CI class, that is called Web Services. If we open one up here, you can see that in here we store all the information that our runbook will output. So instead of storing it in some log file somewhere, that we could also do with all the small details, we are storing the big parts in here in the CI object, because most likely we will need this information. So it's quite handy to have it in Service Manager as a CI object.
So we have a configuration item with all of our settings, and then what can I do with this now?
You can scroll here.
So not exactly what I had in mind, but yes.
So I will show you soon. Just give me a minute here. If we go back to the runbooks here, the first run. Oh, wait. We need to go back in here first, and just I want to show you the template here because it's really nice. I guess you all know service request template, and you add a couple of runbook activities in there. So in this case, I have my 4 runbooks in here. And the first runbook, it's this one. It will create the Azure Web Service object. So that's an object from my custom CI class. And then it will create a relationship with the service request. Yeah. I didn't want to edit the service request class because then I will affect everything, all other service requests. So I create a new object and I create a relationship to the work item. And then all the other runbooks, they will get the service request, they will get the web service object, and they will read all the info they need from Service Manager. So instead of having this parent runbook, we just store everything in Service Manager. And a really nice thing here is that if someone calls to Service Desk saying like, where is my web service? Why isn't it deployed? Service Desk can go in here, they can right-click, and they can, oh yeah, thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
They can right-click and they can return to activity and restart activities in a very simple way. If you only use one big parent runbook that you invoke, you can't really restart it in an easy way. Instead, someone needs to go in there and be really deep in Service Manager and Orchestrator and troubleshoot everything. So it's much, much better to divide it into small pieces, independent of each other, store the data they need in, for example, Service Manager, and then build the next runbook to go in there and pick it up. And a really nice thing here is that if you go to the portal, as we create CI objects of the web service class, we can easily create a delete web service request also, where we just list all the CI objects we have in our environment, and someone can pick one and we will delete it. And we start a runbook that will delete it. So I was going to order a new one here so you can see that everything works, but I think you should go on with operation.
Yeah, so while Anders is creating his order here, making his service request, he's made an important point here around Service Manager. So that it's not that you need to adopt Service Manager as your service desk component, etc. Service Manager has tight integration with Orchestrator for Runbook automation, and it gives us this self-service UI where we can validate user input. So when we delete a web service, we're actually just giving them a drop-down. So they don't even have to know the name of it or remember the name of it. They can just pick it. And we all know that minimizing the free text input from our end users makes for greater reliability, right? And the self-service portal, if we look at the Orchestrator web console versus the Service Manager self-service portal, we have no validation capability on user input with the orchestration web console, so I can't prompt that user to say wrong. But in Service Manager, I can absolutely validate numeric ranges, email address formats, or get all the way down into regular expressions, if that's your thing. So we have very strong data validation at that point. So are you ready for me here? Do you have a service that's still cooking? Shall I continue?
It's you could say it's working, but you continue a little bit and let it.
Okay, so we'll let his web service that he's deploying there cook. So let's talk about Runbook monitoring. So who in here has Operations Manager deployed today? Show of hands. Quite a few of you. Yeah, that's great news. Nice. So with Operations Manager, Microsoft has released a management pack that will monitor the health of your Orchestrator infrastructure, the servers, the roles, the database, the services. It'll pick up negative events related to Service Manager, or Orchestrator rather. Wow, that was a rough move. Sorry about that. So it's going to tell you a lot about the health of your Orchestrator infrastructure. What it's not going to tell you about is the health of your Runbook. So it's going to tell us that the system is online, the hamsters are in the wheels. It's not going to tell us if they're running. So we're lacking a certain degree of visibility there into our automation and whether we're really doing what we need to be doing right now.
So it's like you see that the wheel is spinning, the hamster is running, but you don't know if the hamster has a headache.
Wow, yeah. So a lot of an uncomfortable amount of hamster references here. I'm not sure. I guess if you're Swedish, you can get away with that, right? If I do that too much. So I think the good news is here, Brian Wren, who's MP author on Twitter, Brian wrote a management pack in his session last year that will monitor the health of the Runbooks themselves. And my group, Infront Consulting, our authors down here in the front row, built a management pack that we release for free that will, in a more robust way, help you monitor down to the job level what's going on in your Orchestrator environment. So you can get down and see that the hamsters are in the wheel, they're queued up, the feet are moving on all of those monitoring type runbooks that should always be executing. So we never have runbooks that should be going that are stopped for some reason. And here's a custom dashboard. I think Anders put this one together. So you can see the queuing in the upper left graph there. So we see if we have a backlog of activity and our queuing's headed in a bad direction. We see on the right-hand side the results of our runbook. We see runbook jobs, so it gives us some nice visibility into which runbooks are being executed most frequently in our environment. So a lot of visibility, and it's all free. You stop me anytime when you're ready to jump back in here and show us the result. So let's talk about permissions. So how many of you in your environments have Active Directory folks that don't want everyone to have domain admin rights? Or Exchange administrators that don't want everybody to have Exchange admin rights? Yeah, a couple of you, yeah? The virtualization team, the database guys, doesn't matter. Everybody wants to sort of silo those permissions so we have what we need but no more. So when we get into the Runbook Designer here, we have some challenges in terms of what we can hide from the folks that are working with Orchestrator in our environment. So for example, if I tell those virtualization guys, man, I just don't want you guys messing with Active Directory, my Runbook servers have to have the Active Directory integration pack, so I can't hide that from anybody in my environment. And likewise, the global configurations, think run as execution, the global configurations that store the credentials for Active Directory, multiple Exchange environments, multiple System Center instances. If you see one, you see them all. So you have potentially domain admin capabilities to initiate runbooks if we're not very careful in how we take those runbooks from our development environment up into our production environment. potentially some very negative impact. So what we can do right here is establish some security as a first step to hide from folks the runbooks we don't want them to see. And this is probably better just visually in the console. Let me flip over and have Anders just show us here quickly. So the permissions on a folder are very intuitive. Permissions like read, full control, create, and delete child objects. So I can prevent users from, even viewing runbooks that I don't want them to see. In fact, I think you'll have no questions about the permissions, save perhaps one. When we get down to the runbook level, there is a special permission called publish. And so that sounds like one thing, but it's really quite another. So publish controls a user's ability to hit the little green button to initiate the runbook. So I can control permissions all the way down to letting you view, but not actually execute that runbook. Thank you, sir. So let's think about this from a process perspective. How are we going to secure our environment and support, integrate our change management process in such a way that our Active Directory admins can build, runbooks that integrate with Exchange and vice versa, but always understanding how that's going to affect our production environment and ensuring that we never have any negative impact. So it all starts in the sandbox, right? So their permissions are going to be wide open. Everybody is generally speaking going to be an administrator. And you may have your own dedicated sandbox environment. You may or may not even have a shared sandbox environment. It doesn't matter really. So once we develop that runbook, we go from the moonshine runbook that Anders showed you when we started to something we feel is production ready. So now we've logged our change request. We have the implementation plan, the test plan, the rollout, the rollback. We can take that runbook into pre-production, think staging environment, where somewhere where user acceptance testing. Some folks will call that a UAT environment. I need to test my runbook here in such a way that I know exactly how it's going to impact my production environment. You shouldn't be wondering, is this going to work exactly as I intend when I import into production? Because when we get to that production point where we're importing that runbook, the person at the controls importing your runbook, your orchestrator administrator, is guaranteed to know how to import a runbook, right? Usually. He's not guaranteed to be an expert in Active Directory or Exchange or to care anything about how your runbook affects the rest of the environment. So we have to be absolutely certain how this is going to affect production before we start. So there's one thing that's not on the screen here, and it's because it's a secret. So if you're typing, stop typing, right here. This is very, very important. The secret was too powerful to document. So Anders and I like to sanitize our runbooks. So Anders variables, remember Anders mentioned those variables that give us the uncomfortable prompt, that introduce that uncertainty. So how do you clean your runbooks before we get to staging?
So the challenge is that when you export a runbook, if you select to export any of the variables or the global settings, you will export all of them, not only the ones that you are using in the runbook that you're exporting. So when you then move over to the next environment, there will be a quite big risk that you overwrite wrong variables. What you can do then is that you have a blank orchestrator environment in the middle. And with blank, I mean an orchestrator environment that you have installed, but you haven't imported anything in it. It's totally blank, no runbooks. You import your export file, the one that contains all the variables. Import it to the blank environment. You just delete everything there that you don't want to put in your production. Then you run a new export. And that export will also include all the parameters and all the variables, but this time you have already deleted everything, so it doesn't really matter that you export everything from that environment, because it's a blank environment. It will only include the stuff that you actually want to export.
So that's a great point. When we export a runbook and we select that box to export variables, global settings, global configurations, schedules, everything is coming from that sandbox environment, the one that's the Wild West where everybody is an administrator. So what we need, so in the PowerPoint slide in your mind here, envision for me a little box right here that is that sanitation environment. Think a fully virtualized Orchestrator scenario. It could be a single box deployment. I spin it up in Hyper-V or the virtualization platform of your choice. We're going to do it in Hyper-V. I'm going to apply a snapshot or a checkpoint if you're a VMM person. It's completely empty at this point. I import my runbook. I do the scrub, and when I'm done cleaning and exporting, I then apply my snapshot so that sanitation environment is back to scratch. It's back to perfectly pristine. So I'm always looking one runbook at a time in that environment. I'm absolutely sure before I go from dev to staging to pre-prod, UAT, whatever you call it, that this thing is clean and ready for prime time. So where are we with our provisioning?
Yeah, so finally, our Runbook, we submitted a service request. It ran through. As we can see here now, we can see all the steps in the portal, so it's quite easy for someone that ordered this to actually keep track of it. And we get uploaded to this address here. And if we go to the address, we can see that we have our web service running in Azure, and we have verified that it's working from the Runbook, so we can send it to the devs, and they can now start doing whatever they need to do. And we also, in Service Manager, we have a new CI with all the information here, and if the devs, one day they think that, yeah, well, we're quite done with that web service, they can now go in here to this self-service portal, click delete, and then they can select, this is the one that I want to delete, and click next, and another Runbook will kick off and delete everything in Azure. So it's quite a handy way. We create the CI object, we store all the big data in there, all the important data in there, and we have our logs for all the details.
Absolutely. So to tie that off, everybody should have that sort of tiered environment where we have dev, we have a pre-prod, we have production, we have some place to sanitize those runbooks, clean them up. Now, maybe in your environment, folks don't get along. The Active Directory folks just don't play well with the Exchange folks or vice versa, right? So we're still going to have a dev environment. We're still going to have pre-prod. If we can't agree on how to share admin control in our prod environment, what we could do is spin up separate production environments for Active Directory, Exchange, our virtualization guys. And while functional, it's absolutely functional, it sort of goes against one of the fundamental principles of Orchestrator, right? It's cross-silo automation. And if we go this route of multiple production environments, we're really building new silos, right? So not optimal. If you can avoid that, avoid it. So just to wrap this up, we're just right about to the end of time here. Start small. We're not building Skynet on day one. We start simply, and we grow. We build that library of reusable runbooks. Lots of planning before we open the runbook designer. We don't open the console and start building before we've had a good chat about which processes are really going to be good candidates for us to automate. And from an integration perspective, we're going to have great logging, tracking, and UI capabilities with Service Manager that are going to make presenting those runbooks to users in an intuitive way a much simpler task. So, thanks for joining us today. Hope you got some value out of the hour and 19 minutes. Be sure to fill out the evals.
As always, be honest but generous.